Hello there, all of you absolutely lovely people. Today I will be narrating The Partlings, copyright 2022, by myself, Dax Allred. "But who are they?" asked Ben. The young boy squinted his eyes, trying to get a better look at the distant stone buildings across the wasteland. He could feel his father watching him with that familiar concerned look on his hardened, narrow face. "Nightmares, witches, feeders, who knows? The Partlings have always been here, eating everything they can," answered Cor. "You see how dead everything is? It's them." Ben looked down from the large rock they were seated upon. Everything behind them and to their sides were lush, beautiful forest, but everything ahead was dry and suffocated dirt. Even the distant mountains beyond that tantalizingly mysterious fortress reminded him of bleached bone. The stark border between the living and the dead was laced with a few stone flower carvings, as well as blue stones which looked like hard, sharp water. Ben leaned forward. "People die on that dirt," growled Cor. "I wasn't going down there." "Ben, look at me." "I said look at me." The boy reluctantly turned his head to face his father. "People die on that dirt." "Yes, father," said Ben. He grumbled to himself. Cor looked around at their surroundings and sighed. "We've been here too long. Let's get back to the fire." They both stood up and, with wooden spears in hand, began walking into the dense rainforest. "Why is Nar with us?" asked Ben. "Because we can stand to be around him," came a slight chuckle. "He smells." "Not when he's hunting. Old Lady Sex says he's a butthole." "Can be. People call him a bully. Has he ever bullied you?" Ben paused in thought. "No, he never has." Cor was smirking as his golden eyes looked straight ahead. "Never bullied me either. Nar is big and crude and scary, and he smells. And sometimes he smells, but he's strong and he's not mean." "I know he's strong. That black spear of his is as big as a tree." Cor laughed and nodded. "Yes, he's that kind of strong too." The two of them continued on in silence until they reached the clearing. The trees opened up to a happily flickering campfire, filling the site with fragrances of fresh roasted meat. Seated next to the comforting light were two other hunters and their mangy dog. The giant man with his fair skin, wide nose, and black curly beard was also holding a massive spear above the fire. The flames baked the wood into a hardened point. The other hunter, Ben's older brother, had a mirthful tension on his face. Ben guessed that the giant had been entertaining Kron with another wild tale about fighting war and mounting women. Or was it the other way around? The dog laid silently, snacking on a small piece of meat. "Did you see it?" asked Kron. Ben had no idea what expression he had on his face, but it caused Kron's smirk to drop into a look of concern. Cor answered. "I had hoped it would make him scared of the place." "Didn't work," finished Kron. He patted the ground next to him, inviting his father and brother to sit at the fire. He then offered his dad a flask to drink from. Nar was uncharacteristically silent as he pat out a small flame from his black spear. "What do the Partlings look like?" asked Ben. "Don't know," shrugged Kron. He had skewered a small piece of meat upon his own spear tip and was now roasting it over the fire. "You don't want to know," rumbled Nar. "You think you do, you don't." Nar's black eyes stared directly into his. The giant looked like a massive angry boulder. His wild black hair and beard did nothing to soften his look. Ben might have caught Nar and his father sharing a quick, knowing glance with each other, but he wasn't sure. He'd never seen Nar like this before. The giant's angry stare stopped Ben from even thinking. Nar saw something more in Ben's face, and so he growled. "You go in there, we leave you to die. We will not save you, boy. But we do not kill the tribe because of one dumb kid." The ground shook. A distant bird stopped chirping in response to Nar's stare. It was getting dark. The light of the sky was being overtaken by the pale pink moonlight of Arua. The giant sighed, looked around at the falling light, and stood up. He easily dominated the entire clearing. Even the trees looked small next to Nar's massive frame. He then changed the sound of his voice. "My name is Boar," announced Nar. "You see this spear? I made this spear with these 2 hands. I've hunted with this spear. I've killed in battle with this spear. But nobody calls me Boar the Hunter or Boar the Warrior. You see this hut?" continued Nar as he triumphantly pointed at the empty air. "Stone by stone I stacked the walls. I built the hearth, and I defended it with all my strength. But nobody calls me Boar the Builder or Boar the Protector." Kor shook his head and grinned as he handed Ben the flask. "You see this feast?" Nar now pointed at a few small rodents the group had caught before setting up camp. "I killed these great beasts by spear in hand. I roasted them over the fire. I gathered the berries and suckle so my mate wouldn't have to. Nobody calls me Boar the Provider or Boar the Feast Maker." Nar paused and took the time to stare each of them in the eye. "But you screw one pig." Suddenly, the entire camp erupted into laughter. Ben didn't know how long it lasted, but it felt good after the seriousness of the earlier conversation. The boy took a big drink from the flask and spit it out. Everyone laughed again, and Ben wiped the disgusting potion from his mouth. "Dogka," answered his father. Nar reached over to take the flask for himself. "The best fermented dog milk you will ever drink." He took a swig and handed the flask back to Kron. The dog gave a little whine. Nar then turned to Ben's father. "What's the plan for tomorrow?" "Kron and I will get up first and check the traps. You and Ben will stay to clean up camp. When you are done, you will meet us at the Great Stone." Nar nodded. Kor rested his spear upon his shoulder. "Go to sleep, boys. I'll take first watch." Ben laid down on the ground and wrapped his fur clothing tightly around him. He didn't need the warmth. It was a steamy night. He just preferred to bundle up for sleep. Then he blinked, and it was morning. "Sleep well, boy?" asked Nar as he attempted to put out the stubborn glowing coals. Ben yawned and started rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. The forest was cool and gray, with the thick fog hiding the trees. He couldn't see very far at all. "When did I go to sleep?" he yawned. "You rolled over and visited the spirit chief right away. Must have been more tired than you thought," said Nar. "Kor and Kron have been gone since before first light. You pick up the last—" A branch snapped somewhere in the woods. It sounded big. Ben was frozen. His eyes searched the campsite for his spear. It was just out of reach. He started to move toward it, but Nar held out his hand, commanding him to stop moving. The giant stood still, not making any noise. He was focused on the direction of the sound, clearly searching the fog with his ears. Slowly and silently he reached down and picked up his own spear. Ben grimaced to himself. "Dummy," he thought. He looked at Nar and realized the older hunter had always kept his weapon within reach. Ben hadn't. It never even occurred to him that he might need it unexpectedly. Another snap was heard from the trees, followed by a strange chomping sound. Slowly, Nar turned his black eyes to Ben. His free hand rotated palm up with his first two fingers extended in an upward curving gesture. It was the sign for mammoth, the one beast too big for Nar's spear to easily kill. Ben's ears filled with the thumping of his own beating heart. He was sweating and trying not to panic. Nar pointed to Ben's spear on the ground and gave the running signal before pointing back behind him. Ben nodded, hoping he actually understood. The giant hunter slowly shifted his stance, holding his massive black spear in both hands with one end lodged into the ground and positioning one of his toes near the remaining burning coals from the fire. There was now an ominous quality to the silence in the trees. Then it exploded. "Run!" shouted Nar as the beast charged. A great mammoth blasted its way into the campsite, almost skewering Nar with one enormous tusk, but he had already kicked several burning coals up into the beast's face, causing it to recoil to the side, sparing the giant's life. "Run!" Ben was tearing through the trees before he even realized he was fleeing. There was only the vague awareness of the loud struggle behind him. Branches cut his arms as he ran by, and then the ground disappeared out from under him and he was tumbling. End over end he fell. Ben was barely aware of anything. He just rolled and fell, rolled and fell, rolled and fell. Then he stopped. Ben was laying flat on his back. He hurt. A place on the left side of his back felt bruised. Maybe a broken rib, but he didn't know. He tried to look around, but the world was spinning. He closed his eyes, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. The pain in his back demanded his attention, so he rolled over onto his belly. But even with all these distractions, he now noticed something odd. With his face planted in the ground, the soil didn't smell right. It smelled dead. Opening his eyes, Ben found himself looking down on white, parched, suffocated dirt. He looked up around him and his pulse quickened. Everything was dead. But that wasn't the worst part. Before, when he was looking into the dead from the outside, it was barren. But now it looked evil. There was a darkness hanging over the place. It was not the kind of darkness that comes from a cave, or the night, or an overhead cloud. This darkness felt like a dark place was trying to claw its way into a place with light. It felt hungry, and everything swam. Ben climbed up to his knees to try and clear his head and eyes. The land rippled, as if nothing knew where it was supposed to be. He saw a distant chasm, but the crack didn't seem to know if it was in front of or behind the bleached bone mountains beyond it. Even the ground beneath Ben shifted under him. He slowly climbed to his feet but could barely stand up. Even the sharp pain in his ribcage failed to take his mind off the moving ground. "Where is my spear?" Ben realized he'd run off without it. Setting aside his anger with himself, Ben looked around for something to defend himself with, something that made him feel like he could defend himself. He spied a rock on the ground, one with a sharpened edge. Picking up this rock and holding it like an axe head, it crumbled to dust in his hand. Looking back the way he'd come, Ben could see the tree line above the small rippling cliff he'd rolled down. The occasional glint of blue stone could be seen at their bases. The trees did not dance around the way everything else did. It was like they knew where they were. The trees also seemed to glow, since the clawing darkness couldn't reach them. He took a step forward when the ground moved, causing him to misjudge his footing. His step jarred his entire body, and he winced in pain. Slowly he got down on his hands and knees and started crawling towards the cliff face. Ben found that it was easier if he focused on where he was going and ignored everything else. Although he couldn't imagine anyone else being out here, the boy still attempted to crawl without leaving a trail. He had already made too many stupid mistakes today. He wasn't about to make any more. Eventually, Ben reached a small boulder at the base of the cliff. He crawled around to the far side and rested against the large rock. The stone was as decayed as everything else here. It was actually a little soft. The boy was unsettled yet grateful for this. He was tired, confused, and in pain, so he sat there, focusing on that beautifully stable tree line. It was the one thing not swimming around. The cliff itself looked fairly easy to climb. It was more of a steep ramp than a wall. It also seemed to be dotted with places where someone might be able to stand. From here, stone flowers and blue glass clearly marked some sort of split between the two worlds. One blue stone had rolled halfway down the cliff. Ben thought he might be able to... Ka! Ka 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 ka! Came a sound from behind him. Ka 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 ka! The sound was as warped as the land. It constantly shifted from a high to a low pitch, going from fast to slow. Click-a-click-a-click-a! Slowly and quietly, Ben peered around the border to see what was making the sound. There, studying the spot where Ben had landed, was a tall man with no skin. He was lanky, with arms and legs that were too long. His fingers were also long and became red like blood as they ended in long, sharp talons. It wore some sort of light, smooth garment on its lower half. The thing rippled like the land around it as it walked around the spot where Ben had lain. Its arms, legs, and neck seemed to change length as it moved. Ben wasn't certain, but he thought its elbows and knees might have moved as if there was no bone in them. Blood vessels and muscle could be clearly seen in the creature's skinless form. As he slowly turned, Ben could see the face. That horrible face. Its eyes were pink, it had no nose, and the mouth had no lips. It was just an open, fleshy, and toothy grin where a mouth should have been. Its teeth were large, yellow, and flat, almost like some sort of rodent. Ben wanted to run, but something stopped him. Some instinct was screaming from the back of his head, "You run, you die." Looking back up the cliff, he knew he could not climb quickly enough to avoid being seen. How fast can that thing run? How far can those long arms reach? Ben didn't want to risk it. He peered around the boulder again, and was horrified to see that the monster was slowly moving in his direction. He was sniffing the air, following Ben's trail to the rock. If he stayed, it would find him. Turning around, Ben faced the bright, steady tree line and the dark, dancing incline leading up to it. He took a deep breath and positioned himself for sprinting. Ben launched himself into the air before smashing into the ground beneath him. He began kicking at the thing clutching his ankle. Screamed the monster as Ben kicked at his red claw-like fingers. The beast moved so fast, Ben never saw him grab the other leg. Suddenly, the thing's pink eyes looked up at the cliff, and it instantly shot backwards, letting go of Ben. There, where the monster had been, was a giant charred black spear sticking out of the ground. "Move your ass, boy!" came Nar's desperate voice from the tree line. "Here's your spear!" Ben was now scrambling up the cliff while trying to watch the silhouette of his spear falling through the air. The weapon bounced off the angled cliff face in front of him. The monster shifted its gaze back to Ben before lunging forward again at incredible speed. With all his might, Ben rushed to grab his spear and instinctively spun around, landing on his aching rib. It hurt, but his spear was pointed out at just the right angle to save him from the thing's attack. As the beast once again shot away from him, blood could be seen flowing from a gash in the skinless muscle of its shoulder. Ben didn't wait. He climbed towards the trees as fast as his aching body allowed. And he was almost there, just a little bit further, and... Once again, a clawed hand grabbed him by the ankle and started dragging him back down the cliff. But almost at the same time, another massive hand grabbed his own from above. "Gotcha, boy!" yelled Nar. Now both Nar and the thing were pulling Ben at either end. Ancestors, they were both strong. Ben kicked and kicked and kicked again, but he couldn't get free. He looked back and saw the thing clutching his leg. The monster turned and looked to the blue stone which had rolled down the cliff. It looked back up into Ben's eyes and then let go of his leg. Ben flew forward into Nar's arms, almost stabbing the giant with his own spear. Nar drug him away from the cliff and into the brightly lit and beautifully stable tree line. Ben was somehow laying on the soft black soil of the jungle. He wanted to stay there, but he needed to get up. He needed to escape that monster, needed to make certain Nar was safe. He stood up, turned around, and there at the edge of the dead land were two giants staring at each other. As tall and massive as he was, Nar was staring directly into the pink eyes of the rippling, skinless thing. They stood on either side of the barrier, waiting for the other to move first. Fists were clenched. Talons were ready to tear and shred. Neither was attacking or backing down. Time felt thick. "Remember the promise," rumbled Nar.
"Cla cla, sika ka 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 ka, new dead,"
came the insult from the lipless mouth. The two slowly inched away from each other. The creature started its descent down the incline, and Nar worked his way back to where Ben was standing. The giant dropped to the ground and just started laughing. Soon Ben joined in his laughter. It was the kind of emotional release only survivors know. "You scared me, boy." After resting on the ground for a while, Ben had to ask, What was the promise? Mighty ancestors, don't the questions ever stop with you?" Exhausted, Nar climbed back to his feet. "Come on, boy, your father and brother will be waiting for us at the Great Stone. Let's get as far away from here as we can." The giant started leading the way into the jungle. "Nar?" Nar stopped, turned around, and looked back. Ben didn't know what to say. Finally, "You lost your spear. Do you want mine?" Nar chuckled. "Nah, I'll make a new one. There's Partling blood on the tip of your spear. You did that. You're going to be a great hunter someday, just like your dad and his dad." They continued walking off into the dense forest together. "Has anyone ever told you about the time those two saved my life?" "They saved your life?" "Yeah, I was a runt when I was a boy. There was this witch who lived in a walking tree, and there was a lion with 2 dongs. "What?" Nar's epic tale faded into the distance as they walked away. After a few moments, a big black spear was hurled up out of the deadland and stuck into the ground. A bloody bandage tied to the end waved unnaturally in a breeze that wasn't there.